So today I have a story for you called Sinbad the Sailor from the Arabian Nights. The Voyages of Sinbad the Sailor. A long time ago, in the city of Baghdad, there lived a poor man called Hindbad, a porter by trade. The day was hot and his load was heavy, so he sat down to rest for a while. Soon he became aware of the sound of music and the delicious smell of food wafting out of the grand house in front of him. Hindbad was filled with envy. "Great heavens," he wailed loudly, "what has the owner of this house done to deserve such riches?" The owner of this house was none other than Sinbad the Sailor, the famous voyager who had sailed around the world. He heard Hindbad's complaint through an open window and asked a servant to bring him in. Hindbad entered a magnificent hall where Sinbad was entertaining guests. "Come in, my friend. Sit by me and have something to eat." After their meal, Sinbad said, "As for your question, let me tell you and my friends here the story of my voyages, and then you can be the judge of what I deserve." And now we go into the very first story. "I was a young man," began Sinbad, "when I first set out with other merchants to trade among the islands of the eastern oceans. One day, after some weeks of rough weather, we sighted a small island which we thought would give us a chance to have a meal on dry land for a change. So we rowed across and climbed up onto the green mound to prepare our food. As we lit a fire, the mound, to our utter horror, began to heave and tremble beneath us. It was not an island at all, but the back of a fearful sea monster. My friends jumped up in terror, tumbled down the boat, and rowed frantically back to the ship and sailed away with all speed. I was left clinging to the monster's back until it tossed me into the waves and dived down into the depths of the ocean. I fought for my life all that day and through the night. I managed to cling on to a piece of driftwood, which kept me from drowning, but by the next morning I was exhausted. However, a huge wave threw me onto an island which saved my life. It was a real island this time, and there I found some food and water. Feeling a little better, I looked around. I thought that the place was deserted, until I saw a man leading a pair of horses. He told me that he was a groom of the island's ruler. 'Come,' he said, 'we shall ride to the palace.' I was glad of his friendliness, and for my chance to recover after my dreadful ordeal. At his great palace, the Maharaja, that means king, received me with kindness. I told him my story of the sea monster and how I had lost my fortune when our ship sailed off with all my goods. 'Never mind,' he said. 'We shall look after you, and you may stay with us for as long as you like.' That is how I came to spend several months on the island in the good company of its welcoming inhabitants. The city had a fine harbor, and I spent much time talking to sailors who had arrived from distant lands. I was hoping for news from home, as I had begun to feel homesick. One day, a new ship arrived in harbor. I instantly recognized it as the vessel that had abandoned me to my fate on the monster's back. When her cargo was unloaded, it included my own parcels, with my name clearly written on them. It took some while to convince the captain, who thought I had perished, that I was indeed Sinbad. It was only when his sailors recognized me and rejoiced at my survival that he too accepted my word and returned my goods to me. I was now able to repay the Maharaja for all his kindness to me with some gifts. Then I set off at last on my homeward journey. We stopped at several ports, where I managed to trade my goods so well that I returned home richer than when I had left, much to the joy of my family. When Sinbad finished his story, he gave Hindbad a purse of gold and invited him and his other friends to return the following day. Hindbad was delighted with this unexpected gift and could hardly wait to hear the next story. The very next day, after another fine meal, Sinbad began to recount his second adventure. "Although I had intended to stay at home," he said, "I grew restless, So I bought a quantity of goods and, in the company of other merchants, embarked on a new voyage across the seas. One day we anchored near a beautiful island, which we decided to explore. We lowered the ship's anchor and rowed ashore. Landing on the island, my companions set off to explore, while I settled down in the shade of a tree to enjoy my new surroundings, and soon fell fast asleep. When I awoke some hours later, I realized to my dismay that the others had returned to the ship, and would you believe it? They had sailed away. I was marooned again. I climbed the tree to look around. Seaward, I saw a ship disappearing over the horizon, but looking inland, I could make out something large and white between the trees. I went to investigate and found what appeared to be a colossal egg, some 15 steps around. As I stood puzzling over the origin of such an enormous egg, a dark shadow fell over it and me. I looked up, only to see a monstrous bird hovering overhead. This must have been the legendary rock about which I had often heard sailors speak of in fear. Then it struck me that this rock could be my way off the island. As it swooped down to sit on the egg, I unraveled my turban and tied myself to its leg. Then I waited. At dawn, as I had hoped, the rock took off, taking me with it. The bird flew so fast and so high that I fainted, and only came to my senses again when we landed in a deep valley. Swiftly, I untied myself just before the rock snapped up a huge snake in its beak and flew away with it. I looked around, and what I saw filled me with horror. The place was swarming with snakes so huge they could have eaten an elephant. Worse still, there was no escape because the surrounding cliffs were so jagged and steep that no man could ever hope to climb them. I was so frightened that even the sight of the diamonds that lay all over the valley floor did not cheer me up. Instead, I searched desperately for a cave in which I could hide from the slithering beasts. Then I remembered that most snakes would usually hide in the daytime from the sun's heat, but perhaps also out of fear of the rock, meaning the bird. Certainly, as the sun rose, they all disappeared, and I could relax, at least for a while. But not for long. I was suddenly startled by something landing nearby with a heavy thud. It was a large chunk of raw meat. As more lumps followed, I looked up and saw that the man had gathered As more lumps followed, I looked up and saw that men had gathered at the cliff tops and were throwing the meat down. The chunks of meat fell on the diamonds that lay all around. I recalled tales of how merchants would fish for diamonds by throwing meat into which the jewels would stick as it fell heavily upon them. Eagles would then swoop down and carry the meat up to their nests to feed their young. The merchants then ran to the nests to frighten the eagles away with loud noises, and so collect the diamonds for themselves. I wondered if this could be the means of my escape from this dreadful place. So I stuffed as many diamonds as I could into my bag, and, using my turban again, I tied a chunk of meat to my back, lay face down, and waited. Soon enough, the eagles arrived. They were gigantic creatures, and the largest of them saw the meat tied to my back, picked it up, and me with it, and flew up to the top of the cliff. The merchants came running to frighten the eagles away, and they found me on the ground, with a fortune of diamonds inside my bag. They were astonished to hear my story, but delighted when I said that I intended to share the diamonds with them. So at last, concluded Sinbad, by selling my diamonds at various islands on the way, I paid for my passage home. My family welcomed me with joy, and so did my neighbors, with whom I also shared my new wealth. Sinbad received another purse of gold, and was invited to return the following night to hear the next remarkable story. The next evening, Sinbad began. The pleasures of home life did not cure me of my wish for further adventures. So before long I set out on another voyage among the islands. accompanied by a band of merchants. On the 5th day of our journey, we anchored in an island for a meal ashore. There we found a roc's egg, such as I have mentioned before, only this one seemed about to hatch. The merchants, a heartless lot, broke the egg, then roasted the chick inside and ate it. I would have none of their disgraceful meal. Just then, the parent rocks appeared in the sky, flying menacingly towards us. "Run for your lives!" cried the captain. Stricken with terror, the merchants all raced down to the beach, jumped into their boat, rowed back to the ship, and set off away from the island under full sail. I alone remained and ran to hide in a cave. The giant rocks, realizing what had happened, swept down and landed near their shattered egg. They each grabbed hold of an enormous boulder and flew off in pursuit of the ship. Once they had caught up with it, they hovered to take aim, then dived down and each let go of their boulder. Both hit the ship, which was smashed to pieces and sank without a trace, taking all my companions and the cargo with her. I was appalled to witness this tragedy, said Sinbad, but could not help feeling that the rocks had some justification for their anger at the loss of their chick. After they had flown away, I wondered what would become of me next. Luckily, I found plenty of fruit and fresh water, so I survived well enough until, 3 days later, another ship dropped anchor near the beach. The traders on board were astonished to hear my story and expressed their sadness about the fate of my fellows and the loss of all my goods. They invited me to join them on a coconut hunt. "You will find it very worthwhile," they said. I gladly joined them, and after a long march, we reached a forest of coconut trees. They were so tall that it would have been impossible for us to climb them to reach the nuts at the top. However, there was a troop of monkeys chattering away up among the treetops. One of our party told us to pick up some pebbles from around our feet and throw them at the monkeys and watch what would happen next. We did as he said, and saw to our delight that the monkeys were so angered by our marriage that they began to retaliate by throwing coconuts back at us. That was exactly what we wanted to happen. We took good care to catch the nuts before they hit the ground and cracked open, stowing them carefully in our sacks until every one was full. Pleased with our success, we returned to the ship and loaded our bounty into the hold. Then we headed back into the coconut grove and resumed our battle with the obliging monkeys, who soon provided enough coconuts to fill our entire ship. As we knew, these coconuts would be most valuable, so we divided them fairly between us. After this fortunate episode, we sailed around several islands and traded our coconuts with the inhabitants, or exchanged them for spices, pepper, or pearls. In many places, coconut milk was a much prized drink, and we were paid handsomely. Once we had sold all the coconuts, concluded Sinbad, we parted company. I took my share of the bartered goods and profits and sailed home. I gave 1/10 of my profits to the poor and began to relax at home with my family again. As before, Sinbad was given another purse of gold and told to return the following night. The next night, after dinner, Sinbad began to recount the story of his last adventure. "I was getting old by now," he said, "and I thought that my traveling days were over. But some friends persuaded me to join them, and I could not resist. So we loaded our ship with valuable goods to sell, and once again I found myself embarking on a new voyage. Alas, this journey began terribly, for on the very day we left port, we were attacked by a band of pirates. As they leapt on board with swords drawn, we feared for our lives. But when we offered no resistance, they spared us and put us in chains instead. They towed our ship to a distant port, and as they did in those days. We were sold as slaves. I was lucky to be bought by a kind master who treated me well. He gave me good food and lodgings, and I had no complaints, other than the loss of my freedom and of all my goods in the ship, which the pirates took away. One day, my master took me deep into the forest and ordered me to climb a tree, saying, "Stay there until you see the elephants pass by. Choose one with good tusks and shoot it." He left some food for me and returned to town. I was most reluctant to shoot such a noble creature as an elephant, but I was a slave, and orders were orders. The next morning, with a heavy heart, I killed an elephant with my bow and arrow. My master was very pleased. We went to bury the poor creature, but kept his tusks. I realized that it was only for his valuable ivory that my master had ordered me to kill the magnificent animal. The following day, my master ordered me to shoot another elephant. But when they arrived, instead of passing by, they stopped and stared straight at me. I was terrified, and the leader curled his trunk around my tree and shook it so hard that I fell headlong at his feet. I feared he would trample me to death. But no, he picked me up and placed me on his back, and followed by the others took me through the jungle to a mysterious hidden grove, where he lowered me gently to the ground and left. I looked around in amazement. The grove was filled with old elephants' bones and ivory tusks. It was the legendary elephant's graveyard that I had heard so many stories about. It seemed that the elephants knew I was only after their tusks, and so they brought me to their secret burial place, as if to say, "Here they are, help yourself, but don't shoot us." My master was overjoyed that I had found such a treasure trove for him. We returned to the grove on a tame elephant and loaded 2 more enormous baskets full of tusks. After many more trips to the elephant's graveyard, my master's store was full of ivory. As a reward, he gave me not only my freedom, but half his hoard of ivory, which I knew was worth a fortune. As we sailed home, concluded Sinbad, I recalled all the dangers I had faced during my voyages. Sea monsters, rocks, and giant serpents, and also the good luck brought to me by the monkeys and the elephants. So I resolved to be as generous as my kind slave master, and share my wealth with those in need. The whole company thanked Sinbad for telling them his story so well, not least Sinbad the porter. "Sir," he said, "your tales of dangerous adventures have amply proved that you deserve all the comforts you now enjoy. May you live a long and happy life, Sinbad the sailor." The end. Today we're going to be making a paper boat. This paper boat is special because it will be covered in plastic, which means that you can float it in water as much as you want and it will not soggy and sink. So without further ado, let's get to what you will need. So the first thing you're going to need is a piece of paper. And now this piece of paper is going to be the name basis for your boat, and I would like to name my boat the SS Storybook. So I'm going to take a Sharpie and write its name just about 1.5 inches from the top. And just about in the middle. The SS Storybook. And now, I put it inside a sheet protector. And now we fold it down to the middle. You want to make sure these creases are nice and sharp, because if they're not, then you will end up with some trouble. And then we're going to fold it in half, just like this. And take each corner and fold it down to the middle.
And we do the same with the other corner. And now we're left with this bottom edge over here. So what are we to do with this? Well, we've got to make it part of the triangle, of course. So we take the corner of each end, fold it up just like that. Do the same for the other side. We fold up the bottom to fit nice and neat on the top. And now we have a perfect triangle. But the one thing that's better than a perfect triangle is a perfect square. And that's what we're gonna make. Just take the middle of the triangle and hold each side with one hand and pull it. There you go, your perfect square. But make sure you always crease after every single fold. So all that's left to do is take this bottom edge and fold it up as high as you want. I find that this is the best height so that you can see the sail. And do the same with the other side. And there we go, it's another almost triangle. And we're gonna do the same thing that we did with the triangle earlier by taking one end, the middle of each side, and pull out. And there we go. And make sure you smooth that out, nice and tight. And now comes the most exciting part. Take one end of each thing, and the moment of truth, and you pull them out. The SS storybook is ready to set sail. Why don't we go put her out into the ocean right now?
Now for the moment of truth. The SS Storybook's maiden voyage. It floats! Yay!
So, that's today's story. Hope you liked it and the craft. See you next time.